Jane Gunter was the lady who offered her seat to Rosa Parks on the bus in Montgomery, Alabama on December the 1st, 1955. In this programme, we'll be looking into what happened on that day and how it came to change the whole African American civil rights movement as a whole. This is the story of Jane Gunter, an extraordinary woman at an extraordinary time. Jane Gunter was on the bus in Montgomery, Alabama on the day Rosa Parks was arrested for refusing to give up her seat to a white man. What makes her story so amazing is that as a white woman, she offered her seat at a time of huge repression. Jane has only ever given one television interview about this before, as her friends tell her she needs to get it recorded for the history books. In this programme, we'll also explore how Rosa Parks defied authority and changed lives for the better permanently in America for the African American community. This exclusive 15-minute interview started with the obvious question: what happened? Okay, so thank you very much for being here. It's an honour to speak to someone who had such an impact, really, in everything that happened. So tell me your story, tell me what happened from your perspective.
Starting when?
Starting from when you first sort of witnessed segregation and that kind of thing. How did it make you feel? What went through your mind when you used to see scenes like that in public?
First of all, it was just a day. It was a happening, something that took place that day. I left Atlanta as a bride going to Maxwell Air Force Base in Montgomery, Alabama. On that long road, there was this field, and it had some strange looking stuff in it, and I said, "Papa, what is that?" And he said, "Honey, you know that's cotton." And I said, "No, Papa, you know cotton comes from an aspirin bottle." And he said, "What a silly girl." So I get to Montgomery, went to the base doctor because I was going to have a baby, and he said I had to do a lot of walking so I could be ready for natural childbirth. So I walk every day and ride the bus around. Sometimes I would ride the bus to town and sometimes I would walk home, but I did a lot of walking. One day I happened to be on a bus on the long seat up front behind the bus driver, and I happened to be in the middle of ugliness. I had never been around conversation like that. I came from a very gentle household. My mother did not see color. I never saw color. I played with the Jewish, black, white kids in my neighborhood. We didn't know we were different. I found that out later after I was in Montgomery. But the bus driver commanded this lady. I don't remember her getting on, but I remember him turning around and saying something like, "Give us that seat." I do have that in audio, the transcript of meeting with Mrs. Parks and going over that day. We relived that day, and I was, I guess, shocked to hear how ugly he was to an older woman. And she was in her 40s, but she was older than I was. So anyway, when the moment came that she was told to get up, I said, "Oh, she can have my seat." And I started to stand up, and this tall, light-skinned, light-haired man pushed his knees into my knees and said, "Don't you dare move." Well, later when I met with some people interviewing me, when I met Mrs. Parks again, the question was, what difference did that make? And my answer was, women did what men said in the 50s. "Well, I know, but why didn't you? Well, you just, it's the way it was in the 50s.
40 years later, Jane Gunter was given the privilege of being able to meet Rosa Parks in a hotel room. The audio transcript of the conversation which took place still exists to this day in digital format, which Jane has herself. Here we can see Jane explaining her story. And here is when Jane offers her help to the Rosa Parks Foundation, work she still assists with today. when you offered your seat,
Mm-hmm.
obviously everyone knows that it was illegal for her to have sat in your seat, but what could have happened to you?
I have no idea, but actually everyone did not know. I did not know. I had no idea there was anything going on. I didn't see what was going on. I didn't see it in Atlanta, but it was worse in Montgomery. When she was arrested, I was already off the bus because we were told to leave, and he was going to call the police. And a student asked me once, so why did I do that? And of course it was because I was told to, but the main thing was he had to get off and go to a phone booth and make a phone call. We didn't have cell phones back then.
Okay. So how did your family react when they found out what you had done in such a public place?
My family didn't find out because they lived in Atlanta, and it was my husband and myself, and I don't think it was ever spoken because I was not in the city when all the busing was going, all the not riding the buses and cars picking people up and taking them around. Actually, had I been older and we had had a car, I would have been one of those people taking people around. That's just who I would have been. I didn't know anything about it, so on my daughter's 50th birthday, in front of my entire family, I decided to ask the question in front of everybody, was I really on that bus? Would you validate my memories? And he said, of course you were. And I said, so why didn't I know that this man named Martin Luther King and people were not riding the buses? Why did I not know that? And he said, I never let you go back to the city. And that's why I didn't know. But later, when my son saw a magazine and said, Mom, this is the funniest looking bus, and after that I called and made an appointment and met Mrs. Parks in her hotel room in Atlanta, and we talked about the story.
So you remained in contact with Rosa Parks?
I didn't talk to anybody for 40 or more years. I never spoke the story. It was a scary story. It was very ugly. It's not a pretty story. It was an ugly thing going on. I wanted to protect everybody and give them big hugs and help them out, but you didn't do what your husband said don't do.
Okay. And how did the community react? I mean, were you mentioned in newspapers or?
No, I was not. That was never spoken.
Okay.
In fact, when I met in Atlanta with Mrs. Parks, the transcript that I'll give you, those questions are asked, and why did you come forth now? And they validated that I really was on the bus. Mrs. Parks said that I was there because I identified the man that had not been identified.
And when you met with Mrs. Parks again, sort of 40 or so years later,
Mm-hmm.
what was your initial feeling? What did you want to say to her? You know, because you'd been reunited after so long. What happened?
I was asked recently, did I feel like I was in a holy place because I was sitting there with my shoes off and looking at her. All I could see was a woman full of grace. She was elegant. She was very graceful. And knowing her after that day, that's exactly who she was. It kind of demanded you be at her feet. Not commanded, but it just brought me to my feet to be able to speak to her, to my knees to be able to speak to her.
And you have said she was a remarkably graceful woman. So how was she as a person? I mean, other than graceful, I mean, how was she? I mean, was she exceptionally kind? Was she, you know, because she'd been brought up in a time of immense sort of pressure against her. How do you think that she managed to keep all of that aside, all of that sort of hatred that she must have felt aside, to be this remarkably kind person?
Those are things that you can find in history books, but my story can only be the part that I can tell you. I have no idea. I just know that when I met her and when I saw her the times after that, I felt like I was at the with a very gentle woman, very kind, and the only other person in that category, and I don't meet very many little ladies anymore that are full of grace, but Elaine Steele, the co-founder of her foundation, institute, she has that same countenance.
And I believe you've continued work with the Rosa Parks Institute throughout your life.
I still do.
So what kind of things have you done with the Institute?
Actually, I met with the group here in Atlanta that were choosing the last, I think, 12 or 13 students to go to Ghana, and it was an awesome event. I happened to be there, and that night when I got to this place for the interview, who was at the door but one of the young ladies from SCLC that interviewed me that first time I met Ms. Parks. And we all went out to dinner at 1 o'clock in the morning. But
okay. And you were recently at the unveiling of the Rosa Parks statue.
Yes.
In Washington.
Mm-hmm.
So what happened there? Tell me about that.
I was invited to come, and I was introduced to the world at that point. That was the first time I was introduced as the white woman on the bus with Mrs. Parks, and that was a validation.
You've always remained sort of remarkably humble about what happened. Why is that? I've always wondered that, do you never feel the urge to sort of say to people, this is something I did? Because it is such a defining moment in history. It's something that people really look at in the history books and they see what happened in Montgomery, Alabama. But yet you always remain so humble about it. Why is that?
I have no reason to tout myself. I just happened to be there that day. You could be the person in the middle of history, which history is yesterday, not today. You have no idea. In fact, you're in history right now, tomorrow.
Yes. Do you continue to speak on equality now?
I beg your pardon?
So do you continue to speak on equality now? So I believe you've mentioned in a previous interview that you've spoken at schools, and what kind of things do you talk about?
Well, Black History Month, since '92, I have been asked, usually a full calendar in February, to speak in schools, and I've spoken at an international school once, and all the children came from all over the land, and at the very end, it was question and answer time, and a little boy raised his hand, and he said, "Were you still black when you were a little girl?" And I said, I have no idea. My mother never told me. We never saw color. And in their school, they didn't see color because they were just international kids.
Okay. And the US now is still, I've come over from the UK, I still see the US as a very sort of unequal society to a certain extent. Does this anger you that equality has only come so far?
Why would it anger me? I myself live in a whole different bubble because I work every day in a volunteer ministry that takes care of the poor, and my volunteers and board, we're all from every church and every denomination, every color, race, creed. I don't see division. I know it's there. I'm not hiding in the sand, but I don't live in any of that.
Okay. And final question.
Okay.
What do you believe Mrs. Parks' legacy is?
Oh, her legacy would be that young people, when I say the word to be an activist, it would be get out there and push helping other people. She would want them to help. She would want them to be ladies and gentlemen, because when I was in the room where the students were being selected, instantly every wiggling child came to attention. there would be no cell phones, there would be no earbuds, there would be no conversation or gum, would be no putting your hands in your pocket. When you leave here and you go to Ghana, you would be perfect ladies and gentlemen and represent America and represent youth that would represent well. And that's what Mrs. Parks wanted the youth to do, wanted them to represent their people well. Be kind. Help somebody, pull somebody up.
Okay. I'd like to thank you very much for taking the time to speak to us.
You're so welcome.
It's a fascinating and amazing story of such bravery in such a time of repression, especially as, a female, having to do whatever, what the male said and that kind of thing. So thank you very much.
Thank you.
To this day, Jane still has plenty of memories of Rosa Parks.
And I, years ago in the 90s, and I've kept it. It was addressed to us, and she signed it. So that's a treasure for me. And also, this is the first day I met her. And we were interviewing. I was at her knees, and I was able to touch her, to be able to just touch her. It was just absolutely awesome. And I was able to say, in fact, I didn't remember whether I said it to her or whether I wish I had said it to her. But it was like, I am so sorry for what's gone on. I had no idea. And people are offended about me saying, I have no idea, because why didn't you know? Well, I didn't live in that prejudice. I lived in loving, gentle people. But I listened to the transcript, and I did say that.
A cheque given to Jane Gunter by Mrs. Parks is also something she treasures fondly.
This is a frame that I put 3 pictures in that I really love. She was signing my book, and I was signing hers, and she said some beautiful words about meeting me as a missionary, and it was just awesome. And then the one up top on the right, the one that I'm at her feet, and then being able to touch her here was just awesome. This is a check that she gave me to pay for my book, but I decided to keep it, and on the back side of this is the canceled check that I paid to the ministry to pay for that check, so I wouldn't be taking $12.50 for my book, and I have her check.
Her legacy still lives on today. Rosa Parks remains one of the defining people of the civil rights movement in American history. Had Rosa not started the bus boycott, the movement for racial equality in the United States could have taken many more years to come forward. She was born in Alabama in 1913 to Leona and James Macaulay. After starting out with promising studies in education, she later had to drop these classes for her grandmother and later on her mother, who both became ill. In December 1943, after marrying Raymond Parks, she joined the Montgomery chapter of the National Association for the Advancement of Colored People, or NAACP. She was elected secretary and was the first female member of the chapter. She had faced discrimination for many years on the bus. In 1943, she entered the front door onto the bus and paid her fare, but was told by bus driver James F. Blake that she must exit and re-enter the bus using the back doors. Before she could reboard the bus, Blake drove off, leaving her to walk home in the rain. On the 1st of December 1955, Parks would meet Blake again on the day she was arrested for refusing to give up her seat to a white man. It was on this day that Jane Gunter was sitting on the bus and heard the whole conversation and watched the situation unfold. It was later on in numerous interviews that Parks said she didn't stand up because she was tired. Not physically tired, but tired of the segregation. Parks did remain graceful throughout her life. In her autobiography, Parks mostly commented on the kindness of white strangers, although obviously she does comment on the racism around at the time. At her funeral in October 2005, many passionate speakers spoke about the change Rosa Parks had made to the world and the difference she had made to American society.
To Bishop Ellis, Bishop Cousins, Reverend clergy, political leaders, legislators, to the family of our departed mother. I greet all of you and wish you peace. And the only way we can arrive at peace is to know God's will and submit to his will, and then we enter into peace with God, and it's easier then to find peace with our fellow man. I came today not just because I was invited. I didn't know Mother Rosa as the members of the family and as many of these civil rights giants that are here today. But I know Mother Rosa from the inside out, not necessarily from the outside in. Those who are not the friend of those that she sat down that we may stand up for. The church her spirit was a spirit of defiance against an unjust law and an unjust social order. We cannot honor her legacy with song and speech. President Clinton said she made America better, but she didn't make America good. Better is not good. Yes. There's a long way to go before America can be good America and a really, truly great America. And as long as there are children dying in the streets of America from poverty, we need to be defiant.
In February 2013, a statue was erected of Rosa Parks at the Capitol Rotunda in Washington. She is the first woman and second private individual to be immortalized in the rotunda.
Rosa Parks, the First Lady of Civil Rights, the mother of the movement, the saint of an endless struggle. However one wished to refer to her, this statue forever ordains Rosa Parks' status as an icon of our nation's struggles to live out its declaration that we are all created equal.
This statue speaks for itself, and today we speak for a nation committed to remembering and, more importantly, emulating Rosa Parks. So we place her here in a chamber where many fought to prevent a day like this, and right in the gaze of Jefferson Davis, the President of the Confederacy.
She lived a life of activism, but also a life of dignity and grace. And in a single moment, with the simplest of gestures, she helped change America and change the world. Rosa Parks held no elected office. She possessed no fortune, lived her life far from the formal seats of power. And yet today she takes her rightful place among those who've shaped this nation's course.
Years later, Rosa Parks' legacy still lives on. In every school, bus, train, movie theatre, community theatre, or public place where there was discrimination and segregation, there is no more. Fortunately, due to Jane Gunter, this story can still be told today to make sure that dangerous discrimination does not occur in the US ever again. Every member of any minority today should thank Rosa Parks and others who were pivotal in the movement for her bravery and courage at such a repressed time in history.